Before one reckless TV host learned that attacking a legend comes with consequences, she thought she had the perfect takedown planned. This is the story of how one arrogant question destroyed her career and made Clint Eastwood a viral sensation. Aren't your values outdated? TV host Rachel Sterling's question hung like ice in that studio. In 2019, this woman who had built her career on cornering celebrities had targeted Clint Eastwood. She planned to humiliate him on live television in front of millions. But what Rachel didn't know was this: Clint Eastwood never enters a fight unarmed. The moment Clint Eastwood stepped onto the stage, the tension was palpable. The studio lights blazed down, the audience murmured with anticipation, and across from him sat Rachel Sterling, a notorious TV host known for her sharp tongue and progressive agenda. She had taken down celebrities before, cutting them off, twisting their words, humiliating them on national television. Tonight, Clint was her next target. Rachel Sterling had built her career on cornering guests, trapping them in carefully orchestrated interviews designed to make them stumble. Her show, The Sterling Report, was a ratings juggernaut, not because it was fair, but because it was ruthless. Guests who didn't align with the network's narrative were cut off, mocked, and made into villains in front of a live audience trained to react on cue. And tonight, Clint Eastwood was her next victim. Behind the scenes, the producers had scripted the ambush. They handpicked loaded questions designed to bait him into controversy. The teleprompter was filled with snarky one-liners she could use to twist his words. The audience, strategically placed with young progressive activists, had been coached to laugh at the right moments, to groan when Clint spoke, to create the illusion that he was out of touch, irrelevant, a relic of a bygone era. Everything was set for another viral takedown. Rachel had done it before. Politicians, CEOs, even decorated veterans. She had humiliated them all. The formula was simple: bait the guest, cut them off before they can clarify, and let the audience's reaction do the damage. By the time the clip hit social media, the narrative would already be written. At 89 years old, Clint Eastwood walked onto that stage wearing a simple dark suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes sharp as steel. He moved with the same measured pace that had defined his screen presence for decades, unhurried, observant, present without demanding attention. The crew whispered among themselves, some excited to witness what they thought would be another celebrity meltdown, others uncomfortable with what they sensed was about to unfold. Rachel Sterling sat behind her sleek desk, confidence radiating from every gesture. She had studied Clint's recent interviews, noted what she perceived as his vulnerabilities, his traditional viewpoints that she could easily frame as outdated. She had prepared her arsenal of cutting remarks, her perfectly timed interruptions, her condescending smiles. Everything was choreographed for maximum humiliation. But what Rachel didn't count on was this: Clint Eastwood wasn't just another guest. He saw right through the setup, recognized the trap for what it was, and when the cameras started rolling, he was ready. The moment the cameras went live, Rachel Sterling went on the attack. With a rehearsed smirk and a knowing glance toward the audience, she leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "Clint, you've had an incredible career, but let's be honest, times have changed. Don't you feel like your rugged old-school persona doesn't really fit in today's world anymore?" Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. The producers had primed them well. The tone was mocking, a polite way of telling him he was a relic. The trap was set. Clint didn't react, at least not the way Rachel wanted. He held her gaze, his face unreadable, letting the tension hang in the air. She continued, pressing the advantage. "I mean, let's talk about some of your films. The whole tough guy cowboy with a gun thing. Isn't that a little, I don't know, problematic in today's climate?" The audience laughed louder this time. A few clapped. Rachel let it linger, basking in the momentum. She had done this 100 times before. Rattle the guest, get them defensive, then dismantle them piece by piece. Clint finally opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off immediately. Because honestly, it's kind of fascinating the way people used to idolize those types of characters, silent, brooding, violent when necessary. But we live in a world of nuance now. Don't you think it's time to evolve past that? Another wave of laughter. The live audience was eating it up. She turned to them, smiling as if Clint had already lost the debate. Clint let out a breath, about to respond, but Rachel kept pushing. Or is it just hard for you, letting go of that old school masculinity? That whole tough guy act? Was it ever real, or just Hollywood pretending? Gasps this time. A murmur swept through the audience. It was a direct shot, an insult wrapped in faux curiosity. Rachel sat back, as if daring him to respond. Clint leaned forward, finally taking the microphone, but just as he started to speak, she cut him off again. No, but seriously, do you ever feel like, deep down, maybe you wish you had been born in a different era? One where you didn't have to answer these kinds of questions? The audience erupted in laughter. Rachel grinned, sensing victory. She had cornered him. If he pushed back too hard, he'd look angry and outdated. If he stayed quiet, he'd look defeated. It was the perfect setup. But what Rachel didn't realize was this: she had just overplayed her hand, and Clint was about to flip the entire script. Clint Eastwood sat still for a moment, letting the laughter echo around the studio. His sharp blue eyes flickered toward Rachel, then to the audience. Young, smug, certain they were watching another celebrity get dismantled on live television. Then he chuckled. It was low, effortless, a sound so unshaken that the room began to shift. The laughter from the audience faltered. The energy, once so clearly in Rachel's favor, started to slip. Then, in that calm, gravelly voice that had commanded Hollywood for decades, he leaned forward and said, "You ever notice how the people who talk about tough guys the most are the ones who'd fold the quickest in a real fight?" The air tightened. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Rachel's smirk twitched. She wasn't expecting that. She had assumed he'd go on the defensive, stumble through some clumsy justification. But instead, he struck first. "You keep calling it an act," Clint continued, voice measured, calculated. "Like it's pretend. Like the only strong men you've ever seen are the ones on a movie screen." He let that hang for a second, then leaned back, looking directly at the camera. "But see where I come from. There was no director to yell cut when things got rough. You handled your business, you protected your own, and if a man tried to humiliate you just to get a few cheap laughs..." He let that sentence linger. The audience was dead silent now. No more chuckles, no more claps. The mood had shifted, and Rachel could feel it, hard. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "Oh, come on, Clint," she forced a laugh, waving a hand dismissively. "You're telling me you've never played it up for the cameras? Never leaned into that whole gruff cowboy thing to sell tickets?" Clint shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Difference is, Rachel, when the cameras stop rolling, I don't have to pretend to be who I say I am," the audience murmured. A few people even nodded. Rachel's eyes darted toward the teleprompter. She was losing them. She had never lost them before. Panic started to creep into her voice. "But come on, Clint, that whole old school thing is just nostalgia, isn't it? Nobody really believes in that anymore. It's all just bravado." Clint tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. Then, with a slow smile, he delivered the line that would end her career. "Tell me, Rachel, if you were walking home alone tonight and a man stepped out of the shadows with bad intentions, who would you rather have nearby? Me or the guys in your audience who are laughing right now?" The silence was absolute. The silence that followed Clint's question was deafening. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. Rachel Sterling opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The control had completely slipped from her grasp, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Clint turned slightly in his chair, addressing the audience directly now. "See, the funny thing about strength is, you don't appreciate it until you need it, and by then, it's too late." The camera zoomed in on Rachel's face. She was scrambling, reaching for something, anything to pull back control. But it was over. The spell had been broken, and there was no going back. "The problem with your generation," Clint continued, his voice calm but cutting, "is you think strength is toxic until someone's breaking into your house at 2 a.m. You mock tradition until you need someone who knows what honor means. You call us outdated until the world gets dangerous, and then suddenly you're looking for the very men you spent years tearing down." A few people in the audience began to nod. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What had started as an ambush was now turning into a masterclass. Rachel tried one last desperate gambit. "But Clint, surely you can see that the world has evolved. We need to move beyond these primitive concepts of masculinity." "Primitive?" Clint's voice didn't rise, but it carried a weight that made everyone lean forward. "Lady, there's nothing primitive about a man who keeps his word, nothing outdated about protecting what matters, nothing toxic about having a backbone when the world goes soft." He stood up slowly, his full height commanding the stage. "You want to know what's primitive? Sitting behind a desk trying to tear down better men than yourself for entertainment? That's not progress, Rachel. That's just cowardice with a college degree." The audience was completely silent now. Several people looked ashamed. Others appeared to be reevaluating everything they had just witnessed. Rachel's face had gone pale. She knew in that moment that she had made a catastrophic mistake. Clint looked directly at her, his expression almost sympathetic. "You asked if my values are outdated. Well, if having principles that don't change with the weather is outdated, if standing up for what's right even when it's unpopular is outdated, if being a man who means what he says is outdated." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the stunned studio. "Then I guess I'm guilty as charged." The silence stretched on. Rachel Sterling, for the first time in her career, had absolutely nothing to say. Within minutes of the segment airing, the internet exploded. The clip of Clint's devastating response spread like wildfire across every social media platform imaginable. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere you looked, people were sharing, commenting, and reacting to what many were calling the greatest comeback in television history. The hashtag #Eastwood destroys. Rachel began trending worldwide within an hour. The video had been viewed over 1 million times before the show had even finished airing. Comments poured in from every demographic imaginable, but the overwhelming sentiment was clear. Clint Eastwood had just delivered a masterclass in dignity and strength. "This is what real masculinity looks like," wrote one user, whose comment received 50,000 likes in the first hour. "Not toxic, not primitive, just strong, principled, and unashamed." Even celebrities began weighing in. Action stars, comedians, and surprisingly, several female actresses praised Clint's response. "This is why we need men like Clint Eastwood," tweeted a popular actress, "not because they're perfect, but because they stand for something." But it wasn't just praise. The internet had turned its attention to Rachel Sterling, and the reaction was brutal. Her social media accounts were flooded with criticism. People dug up old clips of her show, highlighting her pattern of ambushing guests and trying to humiliate them. The narrative that had once made her famous was now being used against her. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Conservative media hailed it as a victory for traditional values, while even liberal commentators found it difficult to defend Rachel's approach. "Whatever your political beliefs," wrote one prominent journalist, "it's hard to watch that interview and not feel that Sterling crossed a line." The show's sponsors began to panic. By the next morning, 3 major advertisers had pulled their support from the Sterling report. The network's phone lines were jammed with calls, some complaining about Rachel's treatment of Clint, others demanding she be fired. Rachel herself tried to control the damage. She posted a long statement on social media, claiming that the interview had been taken out of context and that she had merely been asking tough but necessary questions. But the internet wasn't buying it. Her explanation only made things worse, with many pointing out that there was no context that could justify her condescending tone and obvious attempts to humiliate her guest. The leaked emails from her production team revealing the planned ambush were the final nail in the coffin. Screenshots of messages discussing how to make Eastwood look foolish and get him to lose his temper spread across social media, providing undeniable proof that the attack had been premeditated. By the end of the week, Rachel Sterling's career was over. The Sterling report was quietly canceled, with the network citing creative differences and a desire to move in a new direction. But everyone knew the truth. Rachel had picked a fight with the wrong legend, and she had lost spectacularly. The fallout was swift and merciless. Sponsors who had initially hesitated to cut ties now fled en masse. The network, facing mounting pressure from advertisers and viewers alike, had no choice but to distance themselves from their former star. Rachel's attempts to rebrand herself fell flat. Every time she tried to make a comeback, someone would inevitably post the clip of Clint's devastating response, effectively ending any chance of redemption. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, became more popular than he had been in years. Interview requests poured in from journalists who actually wanted to hear his perspective rather than tear him down. His films saw a resurgence in popularity, with younger audiences discovering his work for the first time through the viral clip. Hollywood, which had increasingly marginalized older actors, suddenly remembered why Clint Eastwood was a legend. The broader impact of that night went far beyond one canceled show. The incident sparked a national conversation about media bias, the treatment of guests on talk shows, and the value of traditional masculinity in modern society. Suddenly, it was acceptable again to talk about concepts like honor, duty, and strength without being labeled as toxic or outdated. Rachel Sterling's downfall became a cautionary tale in media circles. Journalism schools began using the interview as an example of how not to conduct an interview, highlighting the difference between tough questioning and outright ambush tactics. The clip became required viewing for anyone studying media ethics. Perhaps most importantly, Clint's response reminded an entire generation that there was still value in the old ways. That strength didn't have to be toxic, that tradition didn't have to be regressive, and that sometimes the most progressive thing you can do is stand up for timeless principles. The final irony was that Rachel Sterling, in her attempt to make Clint Eastwood look outdated, had instead proven how timeless his values really were. She had set out to humiliate a legend and ended up creating an even bigger one. In the end, the lesson was simple. When you try to tear down someone who has spent a lifetime building character, you might find that you're the one who ends up broken. And in a world that increasingly rewards noise over substance, Clint Eastwood had reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful response is the one delivered with quiet confidence and unshakable conviction. Have you ever witnessed quiet dignity triumph over loud arrogance? Share your story in the comments below.
Don't forget to hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe if you want videos like this to come. See you in the next story.